I'd like to thank everyone for coming this week. This is our second installment of our Why Spiritual Enrichment series that we hold on each Tuesday in October. If you were here last week, you heard an incredibly powerful story from Marty Daly, and he alluded somewhat to what we'll hear today. So thanks for returning. If you don't know me, my name is Tracy Brinkley, and along with Jane Murphy, I am co-chair of the Spiritual Emphasis Committee here at the Y. And we have a fabulous committee that has put out a spread for y'all. So I hope y'all have found plenty to munch on. And please thank the members who are gathered around as you leave. Today, we are just very humbled to have a man that most of y'all know in our presence. And we'll get to that a little bit more in just a minute. But if you would, I'd like to take just a minute, if you would pray with me, please. Father of all, we are just delighted to be able to gather in this time and space, to come together as a community and hear the story that is really the greater story of us all, of struggle and redemption and walking back out through the fire into the light. Keep us open so that as we leave here, we are more tender with one another and fall more deeply in love with you, O Lord. Strengthen your servant Scott as he shares his story so that we may laugh when he laughs and cry when he cries and stand strong as he does. We ask all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen. When I was thinking about who could best introduce our speaker today, it was kind of a no-brainer. So I got home and reached Stan. And everyone knows Stan Styers, or most of you do, who is just a wonderful, wonderful figure in our community. And while Tommy does just a fabulous job, I think he would tell you that most of what he learned was under the helm of Stan. So we're very thrilled to have Stan come back, who is Scott's brother, and give you a little bit of background.
I think Tommy's far outstrip anything I taught him, and it's reflected, I think, in the programs and the facility and everything, including this gathering here today. Tracy got in touch with me and asked me if I'd introduce the speaker for today, and I immediately said yes, and then I started thinking, what have I gotten myself into? I hardly know the guy, but that's where Google comes in handy, so you can always find out what you need to know. Most of you know Scott. Many of you have known him for a long time. I'm in that category of known him for a long time. And I was there the day he was born. And as a matter of fact, I even knew he was coming several months before he arrived. So I feel like there's a history there that stands me in good stead. You may not know that he's not a native of Thomasville. He was born in Sanford, but he was the youngest and the smartest of three sons of Dal and Peggy Styers. And when he was an infant, I started to say he moved to Thomasville, but he was moved. And he attended the Thomasville City Schools, where he skipped the first grade, which has made him forever young for his age ever since. He went to Carolina before returning to Thomasville, where he spent basically his adult life. And he started out working for our dad in the furniture business. And he ended up working for our dad in the furniture business. And in between did a bunch of other stuff, most of which had to do with the furniture business. Most of you know that he married Paige Freeman. And having done so, for the one freaking time in his life, he followed my example by marrying up beyond his station in life. Most of you know that he's the father of three fine young adults, Kathy, Emily, and Rob. And then, of course, he's like an older brother to another fine human being, Warren Harville King. Right, Zeke?
That's right.
And I think the thing that brings us here today is that Scott has a love for his hometown, for the people who live here. And that's been reflected in his whole life. And I think he's chosen to demonstrate that love through service. He's done it through his vocation. He's done it through his church. He served through being a Rotarian on various boards in the community. and then I'm sure you're aware of 4-term city councilman. And I know, as Tracy has alluded to, that you know why he's here today. Scott has many outstanding personal qualities. Last winter, he went through what I think is fair to call a crucible. You know, a crucible in metalworking is that container that is used for heating substances to a melting point, and it separates the good stuff from the bad stuff. And in human terms, a crucible is a severe test, a trial, maybe a trial by fire in some cases. For Scott, it all started with a touch of the flu. It resulted in his outstanding qualities being even more highly refined. And I know from interacting with a lot of folks that his experience touched a lot of people, also inspired a lot of flu shots. But that's why he's here today, and to share part of that experience. And so I ask you to join me in welcoming Scott Styers to the Spiritual Enrichment Series.
Well, let's see. I get to follow the most impressive speaker to ever be here in the Spiritual Enrichment Series with Marty Daly. I get to follow the most inspirational person in our town, in Tracy Brinkley, and I get to follow the best speaker in Thomasville, my brother. This ought to be a piece of cake. As soon as I get this computer on, and you'll understand why, just a minute. There we go. My wife changed my password, so she does this occasionally, you know, just to keep me on my toes. So hopefully I can remember what that is, and we'll get going here. I want to appreciate, or I really appreciate and want to thank you for you coming today. These spiritual enrichment sessions have a storied history, and I'm honored to be asked to be here. I want to thank the Y and Tommy, and I want to thank Beth Todd. She's my technical assistance, of which I need much. And I want to thank Tracy and Jane Wilder Murphy for asking me to come, because I'm very honored for that. And I want to thank Stan, of course, for that introduction. He was kind and left out all the things he could have said. I'm going to tell you a story, or more accurately, I'm going to read you a story, and thus this computer in front of me. And the reason for that will be evident a little bit later. But the title of the story is In Sickness and in Health. I can't look at my wife back there. I won't make it through this thing. In the traditional sense of in sickness and in health, but in a much broader one as well. And it's a love story, and it's a mystery. Unlike some mysteries, this doesn't begin on a dark and stormy night. It begins on a sunny October day. It was October the 23rd. That was a Wednesday. It was 2013, and I went to an employee appreciation day for the city employees as a member of city council. Typically, we eat a good meal and try to talk to as many people as we can about what a good job they do every day for our citizens. And as a part of that day, free flu shots are offered to everybody that's there. And I looked over at that line. I had a few people in it, and I said, you know, maybe later, but I don't have time today. Fast forward to Tuesday, December 31st, and it's my 61st birthday. It's New Year's Eve. Everybody celebrates on my birthday. And it was a great day down in Chapel Hill. My wife, Paige, and my daughter, Emily, who was a senior at Carolina at that time, and my son, Rob, who was a freshman at App. And they had time off for Christmas, so we'd all gone down to see a ball game, and Carolina won the basketball game. And anytime I can spend time with my family on my birthday and Carolina wins, you know, that's a pretty good day in our house. I know for some of you it's probably not. And when I was walking out of the Ding Dome, you got to walk up a long hill back to the parking deck, and I was really out of breath, and I had a persistent cough, but, you know, so be it. I'm 61 years old. So over the next few days, that cough got worse, but Rob and Emily had a cough too. And I was more worried about them than I was about me. I had a little fever, and sometime in that week, there was a storm. We lost power. And we got this set of gas logs, or we did, that we'd had for over 20 years. And every year when the power would go out, as it tends to do, we always use those gas logs until Duke Energy can get back out there and perform their usual miracle. But we'd been having trouble getting them lit, and I had intended to have somebody come by and look at them, but I hadn't done that. And on that particular night, like probably many of you, my family huddled under blankets and tried to stay warm until Duke Power could get out in the morning. And I spent that time shivering and wrapped in a blanket in front of that fireplace and trying to get those daggum things to light. And I don't know that contributed to anything that followed, but it sure wasn't a day at the beach, I promise you that. And then on Saturday, January the 4th, and by this time my illness had progressed to the point where when Paige said, you know, we may need to go to the emergency room, I was ready. And so Thompson Medical Center did the usual things that they do when they have that many people coming through the ER at that time of the year. And they did the right tests and checked all my vitals, and they told me to, you know, go see my family doctor on Monday. And if you need to, come back to the ER if you don't feel like you're getting any better. And they gave me told me about some over-the-counter medications to take to abate my symptoms. And then on Monday, I was worse, but a lot of other people were worse too, and so I was finally able to get in the doctor on Tuesday, January 7th. And I saw the PA who, you know, did a lot of tests and had some blood work done, and gave me 2 prescriptions to counteract any infection and any symptoms that I might have. Joe's no longer in business, so I had to take my business elsewhere out there. By this time, I was too weak to walk into the doctor's office, so I rode in a wheelchair. And little did I know that, you know, before this thing was over, I'd get pretty good at maneuvering a wheelchair around a crowded house, and that I'd even have one of my own to be proud of. And Paige and I went back home, and sometime around 5 o'clock that day, the PA called and said she'd been thinking about my case, and she was worried. She was concerned, and maybe I need to go back to the ER. Well, TMC is literally a few hundred yards from my house, and the trip over there didn't take very long, and this time I was able to walk into the ER, but that'd be the last time I'd walk for the next 2 months. What comes next is a jumble of hours and days, some of which I slept through, and very little of which I remember on my own. I've been able to piece together a lot of it from notes and emails and things that I found around the house that months later let me know how tough things had been. And what I know now is that I was given some tests, I had some chest x-rays, and admitted to Thompson Medical Center. And then at some point over the next couple of days, my condition plummeted, and the story started to involve a lot more people than just me and Paige. So it involved my 3 children that Stan's mentioned, Kathy, Emily, and Rob, and my brother, Stan, and his wife, Shelton. And we had some good counseling from Dave and Rob Williams, spiritual counseling from Peggy Finch, and Ivan Peden, and Mike Lamb. And the 2 doctors involved that were advising us, our local pediatrics folks, who I don't know how I got a ped, but they gave us some good advice, and they told us to ask a lot of the right questions, and eventually suggested that I be moved to another hospital that had all the in-house specialists that I might need. And so they considered medevacing me to Baptist, you know, that's in a helicopter, and they didn't have a room over there. Well, I told Paige later, I said, you know, it's probably a good thing, because if I'd have woke up on that helicopter, you wouldn't have had to worry about the flu. The heart attack would have killed me. So by this time, it's January 9th, and from emails I read between Stan and Paige, Tracy Brinkley had come to see them, and she was able to tell my family some of the things that they needed to know to make sure I was getting the best care available. Tracy's had a lot of experience. And it was questions about pneumonia and oxygen levels and kidney function and history of diabetes, and I didn't have any, and whether I was a smoker, and I wasn't, and whether I was receiving breathing treatments. Well, 6 years ago, my dad had a variety of cancers, but he also had pneumonia. And 5 days before his death, Stan and I stood by his bed, excuse me, at Thompson Medical Center, and we listened to a doctor tell him that he needed to be intubated and sedated. So they could send him on a trip by ambulance over to Forsyth Hospital. And so on this day when this doctor came in and said, Mr. Styers, we're going to need to intubate you. And sedate you. You can imagine what I thought. But I knew it was necessary, and that was the last moment of true awareness I'd had for some time. Fast forward to Sunday, January 12th. I'm going to get through this. Standing Page has started a series of emails to a group of people that were asking about my condition. And the recipients of that regular update grew and grew as my condition worsened. And doctors, were struggling to find the right combination of antibiotics and steroids and ventilator and blood transfusions and dialysis. And prayers began to play a part in my recovery. Prayers from those close to me, who I knew would be there, but also prayers from people that I didn't know. And prayers from my church, Memorial Methodist. And all of a sudden it exploded. And January 17th came, and the confirmation that my presenting diagnosis is H1N1, commonly known as the swine flu, and pneumonia in both lungs, and renal failure, and reactions to antibiotics that changed often to try to fight the infection. And with Tracy's expert advice and help, she even brought her nurse up to see our family, and so we'd get the right answers and right questions to ask. They started dialysis. And on January the 18th, I've been in the cardiac ICU for Scythe for over a week, and the email update list has grown to about 55 people. And because of my city council role and the fact that Marty Daly, the fire chief, and Ron Bratton, another council member, were all struggling with life-threatening illnesses, the story makes the local papers and for the television stations. And suddenly, people I don't know are praying for me. And several churches have my recovery as part of their prayer list. By this time, folks are forwarding these emails, and including to about 100 people in the sales force of the company I sell for. And the crescendo of prayers is going up. And you don't know how humbling that can be. During this time, even daily updates don't really tell the story, and good news and bad news from the doctors, and improvements and crashes and near misses and a flurry of activity in the ICU as medical professionals struggle to keep me alive while my family kind of watches on in desperation. And all this time, Paige, my kids, and Stan and Shelton, their constant presence is in my bed. But they mostly break the rules about how many people can be at ICU at one time. I had Dave and Rob and Bert Williams there constantly, and Tracy and so many others that I don't even know were there. And more prayers were going up, and I slept. And sometimes people ask me about whether I was aware of anything during that time, and I recall that sometimes I could hear people out in the hall talking about my condition and treatment, and I dreamed a lot and I hallucinated some, and steroids are life-saving drugs. But as Tracy had predicted a couple weeks before, a cocktail of steroids and antibiotics and sedatives and pain medicine can lead to weird dreams and mania. And I remember thinking at various times that I was in Boone or I was in Hawaii. I dreamed of being in the old Davidson Theater as a small child with my grandmother, and I was underwater and I couldn't get out, and I saw all these people that I'd known that are long since gone. And whether it was a dream or something else, my mother told me that it was my time and to go back and keep them safe. And I'd always believed in God, and I knew, Jesus died for me, but prayer came hard. I had this feeling that if God knows my every thought, then He's already a step ahead of me, and I can't edit my thoughts to God. So, I didn't do well with prayer because I thought, well, if I think it, He already knows it. And so, and I'd always get irked with my dad because he was so calm, and I'd get all upset about something and ticked off, and he'd just say, "This too shall pass." But for the first time, I knew what he meant, that all the things I thought were so important, things that stressed me out, were mostly unimportant. It wasn't a conscious thought process, it was just a quiet awareness. And I'm a stereotypical type A personality, and I got to be in charge of everything, and I got to control everything. And I watch sporting events, and I get just irrationally bent out of shape when my Tar Heels or my Bulldogs would lose. And
I expected perfection of myself, and invariably I'd come up short, and I'd be stressed out about that. I began to realize that, perhaps this part of my life was God's way of reminding me that I wasn't in control after all. That doctors and family and friends and churches and even people I'd never met had way more control than I did. But that was okay, because God had control too. At this point, I was often in somewhat of a fog, and I didn't really understand what they meant when they told me that I needed to get to the Whitaker Center. Now, I was kind of drugged up, and to me, I thought, they must be talking about the Weaver Center. It's over there in Greensboro. It's for folks with behavioral disabilities. I don't know why that's so important, but that became my life's goal. And I had a hard time remembering the name, but see, they were testing you all this time, and part of this was mental testing, so you had to be on your game. Well, February 3rd came, and they finally moved from ICU to a regular room, and it was one of several moves over the next few days with varying degrees of success. They began testing me for cognitive function, concerned that lack of oxygen and the time on the ventilator might have taken its toll. And to some degree, they were right, it had, and I still struggle with that even now at times. February 7th came around. I had a new challenge. I had an allergic reaction to a drug, and I was swollen all up and itching like crazy, so they moved me to the pulmonary unit. Then on February 14th, Valentine's Day, and that's appropriate, they finally moved me over to Whitaker. And I found out that Whitaker's actually at the other end of the precise building. It's in the same building, just a different facility, and I'll be doing physical occupational speech therapy. And nursing care is less intensive, so I need my family even more because I can't do anything for myself, and I literally mean anything. And so I needed Paige and Stan and Shelton, and they're becoming experts in all things medical and nursing by this point. But they're my advocates at times when communication breaks down, and I'm still having daily tests and x-rays and tests to determine if I have blood clots and blood work, every other day seemed like, and therapy. And on February 17th, I first stand with assistance. That's a big deal. And I walked 6 steps holding on to a double railing, and I thought I'd won the Olympics. But the next day, I walked 175 steps using a walker. And for the first time in my life, I began to pray not only regularly, but often. And after spending over a month of me being the epicenter of my universe, I began to see other folks who were struggling more than I was. There were people in therapy who were victims of car wrecks and strokes, and people who had cancer and were taking treatments and may or may not be helping, and they were really probably there more so Medicare to pay the bills than they were because they were really doing what they needed to have done for them. People who didn't have family members to speak for them, or when the corporate medical system just absolutely overwhelmed you. And after weeks of writing emailed updates, Stan and Paige asked me if they can create me a Facebook page and issue my own updates. Now, I got a love-hate, mostly hate, relationship with Facebook. I never had a Facebook page, and I rarely ever read anything on it I thought was worthwhile. I can only read so many recipes and only look at so many pictures of my daughter's dogs and cats. But when I came to realize how much work those emails were, I thought, well, that makes sense. So I started learning how to post and message and respond to folks. Janice laughing because I sent them a few that didn't make a lot of sense. And I inadvertently sent out Paige's cell phone number to the entire known civilized world. And I spent an hour writing a post that I thought was, pretty meaningful, only to delete it with an accidental touch of the finger. And I started realizing how many people were suffering, though, through Facebook. And either through their own illness or that of a loved one, or people who were lonely or had diseases from which they might not recover. And a friend's wife who lost both of her parents in 1 month. And I began to see how incredibly blessed I am. How lucky to be able to eventually walk away from a disease that killed 103 people in 2014 in North Carolina alone. How lucky to be able to walk, period. To go back to site to have an operation to get that osteophyte out of my throat so that someday I could eat and drink normally, and after 2 months to be able to go home. I was in a wheelchair at first with a feeding tube, and I lost 40 pounds, and I was incredibly weak. But I continued therapy at Thomasville Medical Center, and I learned to be able to rejoice at carrying 9 pounds down the hall. Now, why 9 pounds? Well, 9 pounds is the weight of a catalog that I need to be able to send to 700 customers that I should have gotten out in January. And to be elated when after 5 swallowing tests, on the 6th one, thanks to Jay Murphy and TMC and their persistence, I finally passed my 6th swallowing test, and I could actually drink a Diet Pepsi and have something besides water. But I wanted to keep a promise I'd made, and it didn't make a lot of sense to most of y'all probably, but it made sense to me that before anything else passed my lips, before water, other than water, I would have some Sweet Frog yogurt from Tammy Joyce's place down there. She does good things. And I had the YMCA and compassionate people who actually cared about whether I continued to get better, because they kicked me out at the hospital after a while. And I could wake up every day knowing I had the love and the prayers of hundreds of people, and those prayers kept me alive. And I don't know what God's plan had been for me, but I do believe that God sometimes changes his mind. And then with even all the miracles of medical science, it was prayer that kept me here. And so, in sickness and health, I had the love of the most wonderful woman in the world, the support of my family and friends, community. And I named some folks, but there's always so many people that go unnamed that you don't think to name, but there were a lot of them. But more importantly, I had the constant, abiding love of my God, without whom none of this would have been possible. And I learned that God knows what I need much better than I do. That his plan for me wasn't at all what I wanted for myself, but how much better his plans are than mine. And it took from early January until the middle of March to walk again, and it took to the end of March to eat normally, and it only took waking up to gain the most powerful skill. To fully appreciate the power of love and of prayer, and to understand that every day is truly a gift, and that not even the next breath is guaranteed. That the things that drive us apart, our sports rivalries and our political differences and even our religious differences, don't really matter. And they're trivial when compared to the lesson that Jesus taught us, that we should have compassion and be selfless and love for one another and for him. And so every single day, people tell me they were praying for my family, and they still are, and they ask me how I'm doing. And I struggle with this foot drop in my left foot, and it affects my gait a little bit. I have to concentrate on that, and it creates pain in my hip and my knee, and my shoulders ache. I don't really know why. And my stamina isn't great yet, and the emotional, or the occasional brain fog that happens when I get emotional, or times of stress, thus the reading of this story instead of me just talking. I cry more often than I ever did, but I pray more often. This picture up here on the screen, the one on the right, that one on the left, that's the most benign version we could show you. Paige had some close-ups, and I said, no, they're going to be eating food. Let's don't do that. But the people on the right here are some of the, literally hundreds of people who looked after me during my time in the hospital. And this photo was taken a couple of weeks ago after we went over for a rehab reunion at Whitaker and went upstairs to the cardiac ICU and where I spent a month of my life, and we visited with some folks. And the little short, cute girl there in the middle with her arm around me, that's Emily. And she told us on that visit that she'd been considering giving up nursing. That the stress had taken its toll, and she questioned whether she could continue to watch people come into that ICU unit and most often never leave. And she hugged me and she cried, and she told me that our visit was a sign from God and that God was truly good. That she needed to rethink her plan. And maybe God's plan was better. To wrap up, I want to share a short video, and it's one that Jackie Johnston Moore posted a couple times on Facebook. And uncannily, at some of the times of my greatest need. And so, whenever I'm feeling sorry for myself or frustrated, I listen to this song. It's a YouTube video of a song that many of you have heard. You may or may not know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. But here it is. Horatio Spafford was a wealthy lawyer in Chicago in the 1800s, and he was a devout Christian and a friend of a lot of evangelists of his day. In 1871, he and his wife Anna lost their only son, and later that year they lost all they had with real estate holdings in the Chicago fire. And in 1873, his wife and daughters had scheduled a vacation trip, much needed, to Europe, and he was forced to remain behind because of a sudden business issue he had to deal with. And several days later, he received the news that all four of his daughters had died in a collision of the ship, but his wife had survived. And so, boarding the ship to join his wife, he penned the now famous words, "When sorrow like sea billows roll, it is well with my soul." Composer Philip Bliss was so impressed with his story and his words that he added the music a few years later, and that's kind of what you're about to hear. This is a little more contemporary version. And when people ask me the state of my health, this is what I want them to know. And while this version doesn't include all the lyrics, the first two lines say, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul."
Grand earth has quaked before, moved by the sound of his voice, and seas that are shaken and stirred can be calmed and broken for my regard. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And it is well with me. And far be it from me to not believe, even when my eyes can't see. And this mountain that's in front of me will be thrown into the midst of the sea. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And it is well
I want you to remember these words. The mountain that is in front of me shall be thrown into the midst of the sea. Let go my soul and trust in Him, and through it all, my eyes are on you. Whatever your lot in sickness or in health, my wish for you today that it is well with your soul. Thank you for being here.